The massive doors of the throne room opened with a sound like thunder. Commander Ben Torres stepped forward into the crystalline hall, his heavy boots echoing against the polished floor. The sound seemed small and weak in the enormous space that stretched before him. High above his head, the ceiling curved into impossible arches. The walls were made of some kind of clear blue crystal that caught the light and threw it back in dancing patterns. Everything in this place was built for beings much larger than humans. Ben felt like a child walking through a cathedral made for giants. Guards lined both sides of the walkway. They stood perfectly still, but Ben could feel their eyes watching his every move. These were Zephyrians, the insect-like race that controlled this part of space. Each guard stood nearly 3 meters tall, with thick armor covering their bodies. Their heads moved slightly as Ben passed, following him with compound eyes that glittered like black diamonds. Ben tried to walk with confidence, but inside his environmental suit, sweat ran down his back. The fate of 50,000 human refugees rested on what happened in the next few minutes. Their colony world was gone, destroyed by solar flares that had cooked everything on the surface. The refugee ships were running low on supplies and fuel. They needed safe passage through Zephyrian space to reach the human worlds on the other side. At the end of the long hall stood the throne. It was carved from a single piece of dark stone, covered with patterns that hurt to look at directly. On the throne sat Queen Vexera, the ruler of the Zephyrian Empire. Ben had seen pictures of Zephyrians before, but seeing the queen in person was different. She was huge, even sitting down. Her body was covered in glossy brown armor that looked both beautiful and terrifying. Her arms moved slowly as she watched him approach. Her head was large and triangular, with mandibles that clicked softly as she breathed. But it was her eyes that made Ben's heart race. They were compound eyes, like those of an earth insect, but much larger and more complex. When the light hit them right, Ben could see hundreds of tiny reflections of himself, all walking toward the throne. 20 meters from the throne, Ben stopped and gave a respectful bow. The Queen's translator device, a small metal disc floating near her head, began to speak in clear human words. "So, you are the human commander," the Queen's voice came through the translator. It was deep and resonating, like the sound of machinery. "I have heard much about your kind in recent cycles." "Your Majesty," Ben replied, his voice amplified by his suit's external speakers. "I am Commander Ben Torres of the Human Colonial Defense Force. I come to request safe passage for our refugee fleet." The Queen tilted her massive head to one side. "Refugees," she repeated. "Yes, we received your transmission. Your world was destroyed, and now you seek to cross our space with 50,000 of your kind." "That is correct, Your Majesty. We have no intention of settling in Zephyrian territory. We only ask for safe passage to the neutral zone, where we can reach human space." One of the Queen's 4 hands gestured, and several smaller Zephyrians moved forward from the shadows. These were court advisors, Ben realized. They wore different armor from the guards, decorated with symbols that probably showed their rank. The advisors began to speak rapidly in their own language, their voices like the buzzing of giant insects. Ben's translator could not process their words, but he could tell from their body language that they were arguing about something. The Queen listened for several minutes, then raised one hand for silence. The advisors immediately stopped talking. "Commander Torres," the Queen said, "my advisors tell me interesting things about your species. They say humans are weak. They say your bodies are soft, with no natural armor. They say you come from a low-gravity world with thin atmosphere. Is this true?" Ben chose his words carefully. "Humans have different strengths than other species, Your Majesty. We may not have natural armor, but we have other qualities that have helped us survive." "Survive," the Queen repeated. "Yes, that is what puzzles my advisors. How does a species so weak survive long enough to reach the stars? How do you travel through the dangerous void of space when your bodies are so fragile?" The compound eyes focused on Ben with new intensity. He could feel the weight of her attention like a physical pressure. For 3 cycles, we have heard rumors about your kind, the Queen continued. Some say you are a prey species that learned to use tools. Others say you are predators hiding behind technology. My scientists are curious about the truth. Ben felt his heart rate increase. This was not going the way he had hoped. He had expected to discuss trade routes and fuel stops, not human biology. Your Majesty, I would be happy to provide information about human culture and capabilities. Perhaps we could arrange an exchange of scientific data as part of our passage agreement. The Queen's mandibles clicked rapidly. Ben's suit translator identified this as laughter, though it sounded nothing like human laughter. Oh, Commander Torres, you misunderstand. This is not a negotiation between equals. You are in my throne room, in my space, asking for my permission. You are in no position to offer bargains. The guards along the walls shifted slightly, and Ben heard the soft whine of energy weapons powering up. His mouth went dry. I am curious about your true nature, the Queen continued. For too long, we have heard conflicting reports. Some say humans are dangerous. Others say you are harmless. I think it is time to see for myself. The Queen rose from her throne. Standing at full height, she was enormous. Her head nearly touched the high ceiling of the throne room. When she spoke again, her voice carried the absolute authority of someone who had never been disobeyed. Take off your helmet. The words hit Ben like a physical blow. He stood frozen, his mind racing through the implications. His environmental suit was the only thing keeping him alive in this atmosphere. The air here was thick with gases that would burn his lungs, and the pressure was more than his body could handle. But even more important was what the Queen would see when he removed the helmet. No alien species had ever seen a human face before. The diplomatic corps had always insisted on keeping first contact formal, with humans always in full environmental gear. Your Majesty, Ben said carefully, the atmosphere here is not compatible with human physiology. Removing my helmet would be dangerous. I am aware of this, the Queen replied. My scientists have prepared a localized atmospheric field that will allow you to breathe. You will not be harmed. Ben looked around and noticed for the first time that several Zephyrian technicians had positioned themselves around the throne room. They carried devices that hummed with energy. A faint shimmer in the air around Ben suggested that some kind of environmental field was already in place. You see, Commander Torres, I have made preparations. I am very curious to see the face of this species that has caused so much discussion among the galactic powers. Remove your helmet, and we will discuss the passage of your refugees. Refuse, and your ships will be turned away from our borders. Ben felt the weight of 50,000 lives on his shoulders. The refugee ships were already running low on supplies. If they were forced to take the long route around Zephyrian space, many would not survive the journey. The Queen returned to her throne and settled her massive form onto the stone seat. All 4 of her hands rested on the armrests as she waited. The compound eyes never left Ben's helmeted figure. I do not ask for secrets or military information, the Queen said. I simply wish to see the face of the species that claims to be both weak and strong, both prey and predator. Surely this is not too much to ask for safe passage through our space. Ben understood that this was not really a request. It was a command from someone who held absolute power over this region of space. The Queen's curiosity was not just personal. She was making a decision about whether humans represented a threat to her empire. Ben's hands moved slowly toward the seals of his helmet. Around the throne room, every eye was fixed on him. The guards, the advisors, the technicians, all of them waited to see what a human really looked like beneath the environmental suit. He could feel his heart beating against his ribs. In a few seconds, he would be the first human to show his true face to an alien species. Whatever happened next would change the relationship between humanity and the rest of the galaxy forever. The helmet seals released with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure. The helmet lifted away from Ben's head with a soft mechanical click. For a moment, the only sound in the vast throne room was the gentle hum of the atmospheric field generators. Then, complete silence fell like a heavy blanket. Queen Vexera's massive form went perfectly still. Her 4 arms stopped moving. Her compound eyes fixed on Ben's exposed face with an intensity that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Around the throne room, guards and advisors froze in positions of shock. Ben stood quietly, letting them look. He kept his expression calm, though his heart was racing. The artificial atmosphere around him felt strange against his skin. It was warmer than he expected, and it carried scents he could not identify. The queen's mandibles opened and closed slowly, but no sound came out. Her translator device hummed with activity, as if trying to process thoughts that had no words. Finally, one of the court advisors broke the silence. The smaller Zephyrian stepped forward, its voice high and excited as it spoke in rapid bursts of its native language. Ben's suit translator caught fragments of the words. Impossible, the translation came through his earpiece. No scarring. No battle marks. No territorial displays. Another advisor joined in, its voice filled with confusion. The bone structure is wrong. The muscle placement makes no sense. Ben watched as more advisors gathered, all talking at once. Their voices rose in pitch as their excitement grew. The queen raised one hand for silence, but her eyes never left Ben's face. Commander Torres, the queen's voice came through her translator, slower than before. I must ask you to remain very still. My scientists need to observe you carefully. Ben nodded slightly. Around the room, he noticed that several technicians had moved closer. They held scanning devices that projected thin beams of light across his exposed head and neck. The beams felt warm but harmless. One technician spoke to the queen in urgent tones. The queen's head tilted as she listened, and Ben saw her 4 hands grip the arms of her throne more tightly. This cannot be correct, the queen said, though Ben suspected she was speaking more to herself than to him. Run the scans again. The technician repeated its measurements, and again spoke rapidly to the queen. This time, the queen's entire body shifted backwards on her throne, as if she was trying to put more distance between herself and Ben. Your eyes, the queen said suddenly. They face forward. Ben blinked, confused by the obvious statement. Yes, Your Majesty. Human eyes are positioned on the front of the head. Forward-facing eyes are the mark of a predator species, one of the advisors said, its voice filled with something that sounded like fear. Every child knows this. Prey species have eyes on the sides of their heads to watch for danger. Predator species have eyes that face forward to track their targets. Ben began to understand why they were so disturbed. Your Majesty, human evolution is complex. We developed these features for reasons that might be different from other species. The queen leaned forward, her massive head moving closer to Ben. Tell me, Commander Torres, what does your species eat? We eat both plants and meat, Your Majesty. Humans are omnivores. The throne room erupted in shocked buzzing as the advisors spoke over each other. Ben's translator struggled to keep up with the rapid conversation. Omnivore species do not reach intelligence, one advisor said. They remain primitive, said another. They fight over resources until they destroy themselves, added a third. The queen raised both her upper hands for silence. When the room was quiet again, she spoke directly to Ben. Commander Torres, in all our studies of galactic civilization, we have found a simple truth. Intelligent species fall into 2 categories. Prey species develop intelligence to hide and cooperate. Predator species develop intelligence to hunt more effectively. There are no exceptions to this rule. Ben felt sweat forming on his forehead despite the controlled atmosphere. Perhaps humans are the first exception, Your Majesty. Impossible, the queen said flatly. My lead scientist is running detailed scans of your body structure. The results make no sense. The technician with the scanning equipment approached the throne and spoke rapidly to the queen. Ben watched her compound eyes grow wider as she listened. "You have the bone structure of a pursuit predator," the queen said slowly. "Your legs are built for long-distance running. Your spine is designed for throwing objects with great force. Your hands have the grip strength to hold struggling prey." Ben remained silent, sensing that the queen was working through something important. "But you also have features that make no sense," the queen continued. "Your skin has no natural armor. Your teeth are not designed for tearing flesh. Your body produces chemical signals that suggest you form cooperative social bonds." Another advisor approached the throne and spoke in urgent whispers. The queen's mandibles clicked rapidly as she listened. "My military advisor tells me something else puzzling," the queen said. "You show no fear, Commander Torres. You are alone, surrounded by beings who could crush you easily, asking for favors you cannot demand. Yet your body shows no signs of the stress responses we see in other species." Ben took a careful breath of the artificial atmosphere. "Humans have learned to manage fear, Your Majesty. It helps us think clearly in dangerous situations." "Manage fear," the queen repeated. "My advisor says that only two types of beings show no fear in this situation. Either you are too stupid to understand the danger, or you are confident that you could defeat us if necessary." The guards around the room shifted nervously. Ben could hear the soft whine of their weapons charging to higher power levels. "I assure you, Your Majesty, I have no intention of threatening anyone in this room. I am here as a diplomat, seeking help for refugees." The queen stood up from her throne again. At her full height, she towered over Ben like a living mountain. When she spoke, her voice carried a new edge that made the air itself seem to vibrate. "My species has ruled this sector for 800 years, she said. "We have seen prey species and predator species. We have seen herbivores and carnivores. We have seen social species and solitary species. But we have never seen anything like you." She began to pace back and forth behind her throne, her 4 arms moving in complex gestures as she spoke. "Your body is built for violence, but you claim to be peaceful. Your features mark you as a predator, but you ask for help instead of taking what you want. Your species should have destroyed itself in primitive wars, but instead you reached the stars." Ben watched the queen pace, beginning to understand that his simple request for passage had turned into something much more significant. "Most disturbing of all," the queen continued, "my scans show that you are not afraid, but you are also not aggressive. This combination should not exist in nature. Fear and aggression are the two forces that drive all intelligent behavior. Without them, a species should not be able to develop civilization." The queen stopped pacing and stared down at Ben with all the intensity her compound eyes could focus. "So I ask you again, Commander Torres, what exactly are you?" Ben felt the weight of the question. Around the room, dozens of alien beings waited for his answer. The scanning devices continued their work, recording every detail of his human physiology. The guards kept their weapons ready, though Ben sensed their uncertainty. He realized that his answer would determine not just the fate of the refugee fleet, but possibly the future relationship between humans and this entire region of space. The queen was not just curious about human biology. She was trying to understand whether humans represented a threat to the established order of galactic civilization. Ben straightened his shoulders and looked directly into the queen's compound eyes. When he spoke, his voice was calm but carried an undertone that seemed to make even the massive guards take a step backward. "Your Majesty," he said, "humans are something that your theories did not account for. We are what happens when a species learns that cooperation is more powerful than competition." The queen's mandibles stopped clicking. Her 4 arms went perfectly still. Around the room, the buzzing conversations of the advisors faded to complete silence. "Explain," the queen commanded. Ben took a slow breath of the artificial atmosphere, knowing that his next words would shape how this entire civilization viewed humanity. The enormous throne room remained silent, with dozens of alien beings waiting for his explanation. "Your Majesty," Ben began, "my species discovered something that changed everything about how we see the world. We learned that helping others makes us stronger, not weaker." The Queen's compound eyes focused on him with laser-like intensity. "Explain this concept. How does helping others create strength?" Ben gestured toward his environmental suit lying on the floor nearby. This suit was not built by one human. It required thousands of people working together. The metal came from miners who risked their lives in deep tunnels. The electronics came from engineers who spent years learning complex mathematics. The life support systems came from doctors who studied how to keep humans alive in hostile environments. One of the advisors spoke up, its voice confused. "But surely one human commanded the others to build this device. One strong individual forced the weak ones to work." "No," Ben said simply. "Every person who worked on this suit did so voluntarily. The miners chose to dig metal because they knew it would help explorers reach new worlds. The engineers chose to design electronics because they wanted to solve difficult problems. The doctors chose to create life support because they wanted to save lives." The Queen's 4 hands gripped her throne more tightly. "This makes no sense. Why would individuals sacrifice their time and energy for others who give them nothing in return?" Ben smiled, and several guards shifted nervously at the expression. To them, showing teeth was a threat display, but Ben's smile held no aggression. "Because humans discovered that when everyone helps everyone else, the whole group becomes stronger than any individual could be alone," Ben said. "A human miner working alone might dig a small amount of metal in a lifetime. But when that miner works with others, knowing that engineers and doctors are also working to help him, together they can build machines that move mountains." The Queen rose from her throne and began pacing again, her massive form moving back and forth as she processed this information. "My scientists tell me this should not work," she said. "Individual survival always comes first. It is the most basic law of evolution. Creatures that sacrifice for others should be eliminated by natural selection." "On most worlds, that might be true," Ben agreed. "But humans evolved on a world that nearly eliminated us many times. Ice ages that lasted thousands of years. Volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun. Diseases that killed entire populations." Ben paused, watching the Queen's reaction. "We survived because we learned to share. When food was scarce, humans who shared with their neighbors were more likely to survive because those neighbors would share back when times were better. When predators threatened our villages, humans who fought to protect others were more likely to have others fight to protect them." One of the technicians approached the throne and spoke rapidly to the Queen in their buzzing language. The Queen's head tilted as she listened, then she looked back at Ben with what seemed like growing amazement. "My biologist says your body chemistry supports this story," the Queen said slowly. "Your brain produces chemicals that make you feel good when you help others. This should not be possible. Pleasure responses are supposed to reward behaviors that help individual survival. Human brains learn that helping the group helps the individual," Ben explained. "We feel happy when we cooperate because cooperation kept our species alive." The Queen stopped pacing and stared at Ben for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice held a note of something that sounded almost like fear. "Show me proof," she demanded. "Tell me of a time when humans demonstrated this cooperation in a way that my advisors can understand." Ben thought for a moment, then nodded. 3 years ago, a human colony ship suffered engine failure in deep space. 2,000 people were stranded with only weeks of life support remaining. The nearest human ship was too far away to reach them in time. The Queen settled back onto her throne, all 4 hands folded as she listened. "A Terran Navy ship was close enough to help," Ben continued. "But it was a military vessel with only basic life support. To save the colonists, the crew would have to give up half their own air and food. The journey back to human space would become dangerous for everyone aboard." The advisors around the throne room began buzzing quietly among themselves. Ben could hear fragments of their conversation through his translator. "Suicide mission," one said. "No rational being would accept such risk," said another. Ben continued his story. The Navy captain asked for volunteers. Every single crew member stepped forward. 300 military personnel volunteered to risk their lives to save 2,000 civilians they had never met. The Queen's mandibles clicked rapidly. Impossible. Military personnel are trained for aggression, not sacrifice. Human military personnel are trained to protect civilians, Ben corrected. The rescue mission succeeded, but it was difficult. For 6 weeks, everyone aboard shared reduced rations and thin air. Some people became sick. Many lost weight. But no one complained, and no one asked to turn back. One of the court advisors approached the throne and spoke urgently to the Queen. She listened, then addressed Ben again. "My military advisor says this story cannot be true. Soldiers follow orders, but they do not volunteer for suicide missions to save strangers." Ben's expression remained calm. "Would your Majesty like to see the official records?" The human government documented the entire rescue operation. "We can provide communication logs, supply manifests, and medical reports." The Queen was quiet for several minutes, her compound eyes studying Ben's face as if trying to read the truth there. Finally, she spoke. "Assuming your story is accurate, what does this tell me about your species? If humans are willing to die for strangers, what does that mean for our empire?" Ben understood that this was the crucial question. The Queen was not just curious about human nature. She was trying to determine whether humanity represented a threat to the established order of galactic civilization. "Your Majesty," Ben said carefully, "humans do not seek to conquer or replace other civilizations. We believe that diversity makes everyone stronger. We want to learn from other species and share what we have learned." The Queen's 4 arms moved in complex gestures as she considered this. "You say humans value cooperation, but you also have the physical features of a predator species. How do I know you will not use cooperation to make war more effectively?" Ben nodded, understanding her concern. "Because human cooperation includes our former enemies. The refugees I am trying to help include people whose ancestors fought wars against my ancestors. Humans learn that former enemies can become valuable allies when they are treated with respect." The Queen stood up again, her massive form towering over Ben. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries of rule. "Commander Torres, you have presented me with information that challenges everything my civilization believes about intelligent species. If what you say is true, then humans represent something unprecedented in galactic history." She began pacing again, her heavy footsteps echoing through the crystal halls. "A species that developed predator capabilities but chose cooperation over competition. A species that survived by sharing resources rather than hoarding them. A species that found strength in diversity rather than uniformity." The Queen stopped pacing and faced Ben directly. "Such a species would change the balance of power in the galaxy. Not through conquest, but through example." Ben remained silent, sensing that the Queen was working through the implications of what she had learned. If other civilizations learned that cooperation could be more effective than competition, the Queen continued, it would transform how galactic politics operate. Trade agreements, territorial disputes, resource allocation, everything would change. One of the advisors spoke up, its voice nervous. "Your Majesty, surely this is just an isolated example. One species cannot change the fundamental nature of galactic civilization." The Queen's mandibles clicked in what Ben's translator identified as thoughtful consideration. "Perhaps not. But I am beginning to understand why there have been so many conflicting reports about humans. You appear weak because you do not display dominance behaviors that other species recognize. But you are actually strong because you have found a way to multiply your capabilities through cooperation." The Queen returned to her throne and settled her massive form onto the stone seat. All 4 hands rested on the armrests as she made her decision. "Commander Torres, I will grant safe passage for your refugee fleet through Zephyrian space. But my decision comes with conditions. Ben felt relief flood through him, but he kept his expression neutral. What conditions, Your Majesty? I want to establish a formal diplomatic relationship between our species. I want to send observers to human colonies to study your cooperation methods. And I want regular reports on how human civilization develops. The Queen's compound eyes fixed on Ben with renewed intensity. Because I believe that the age of traditional galactic civilization may be ending. If humans succeed in spreading their cooperation model to other species, everything will change. She gestured to her advisors, who immediately began buzzing among themselves in excited conversation. My staff will prepare the necessary passage documents, the Queen said. But I want you to understand something, Commander Torres. You came here asking for a simple favor. Instead, you have shown me that the future of the galaxy may be very different from what any of us expected. Ben picked up his helmet and sealed it back onto his environmental suit. Through the clear faceplate, he looked up at the enormous alien queen who had just granted safe passage to 50,000 human refugees. Thank you, Your Majesty, he said simply. As Ben walked back through the long crystal hall, past the rows of guards and advisors, he could hear the excited conversations echoing behind him. The Queen had already begun issuing orders for diplomatic protocols and scientific studies. Ben realized that his simple request for safe passage had become something much larger. The Queen was right about one thing: the age of humans in galactic civilization had quietly begun, and nothing would ever be quite the same again.